Our main speaker, Alastair Leake, is Head of Policy at the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust and has been there for over 20 years. The GWCT is a leading UK charity and in the last 80 years has been conducting conservation science to enhance the British countryside for public benefit. And they've been researching and developing game and wildlife management and farming systems on how best to improve the biodiversity of the countryside. They have long influenced policy with sound science that creates progressive and effective policies. And it's why Alastair is actively involved, ensuring crucial issues are not overlooked by government. Alastair this evening is not camera shy, it's just that he just doesn't have access to a camera tonight. His colleague, on the other hand, is also definitely not camera shy, but will be on camera later. Phil Jarvis, Head of Farming, Training and Partnerships at the GWCT Allerton Research Project. This is the charity farm that has been operating since 1992 over at Loddington in Leicestershire. Phil is additionally also the NFU Environment Forum Chair. On that note, if I can now introduce and hand over the screen to Alastair and Phil, thank you and enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much, Alison, and good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be able to join you this evening and share some thoughts about where we might be going in terms of payments to farmers for the work they do to manage the environment, something I think probably we've been under-recognised for in the past. So let's start out by having a look at what we're facing ahead of us. Well, we all know that the basic farm payment is going to be reduced, and that's worth 3.2 billion to the farming community. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. 60% of farms actually are unprofitable without this payment, and that includes our own farm here at the Allerton project. Without that support payment, we are in the red. But we do point out to the government that to have 70% of your land managed for 3.2 billion is not really a great deal of money when you contrast that with the annual cost of running the NHS of 196 billion. And the cost of COVID so far, I believe, has gone over 200 billion. So these are arguments that we're using to persuade government to support farming going forward. We have to remember, of course, where we came from. And of course, the public particularly dislike headlines like this, where they feel that the agriculture community are receiving money from the public purse for doing nothing. And of course, on the back of that, we have Brexit. Don't be under any illusion. The £350 million there, which is going to the NHS instead, includes all the money that was coming to us as the farming community. And so certainly once the Brexit vote had gone through, there was little appetite amongst politicians that money should continue to go to farmers, certainly in the way that it had done in the past. And I felt we really did have quite a battle to have with Treasury and with Defra to support farming going forward. Well, we're very fortunate that Mr. Gove popped up, and he seemed to be quite keen on the idea of finding some money for farmers, which was really good. And to be fair to Mr. Gove, even though he was only in the Defra office for a short while before moving on, the direction of travel that he set us on has been maintained, and I think is probably a good one. Of course, on the other side, we have the Treasury, whom we have to convince it's worth investing in agriculture. And to be fair to Treasury, they've said to us that if you can prove that there is a genuine public benefit or environmental delivery, and you can put some sort of value on what that is, then we will definitely consider paying for some things for farmers. If we look back on where our policy has come from, we need to be extremely thankful for two gentlemen who wrote policy reports from a British rather than European perspective, Sir Don Curry and the Lawton Review. So these are the fundamental principles upon which we are basing the new environmental land management scheme. What Don Curry said in his 2002 report, I think, A broad and shallow agri-environment scheme should be created that was open to all, that we should have a vision for the future, that farmers continue to receive payment from the public purse, but only for public benefits and for things that the public needs. I think that's a really important statement that was made then, almost 20 years ago, but something that is now very much embedded in the consciousness of government. And that farmers are rewarded for looking after their land and for providing an attractive countryside. So there's three things which we see carried through. Lawton's report was more simple, I suppose. He just said we need to make more space for nature. And how we need to do this is we need to manage that space better. We need to make it bigger. We need more of it, and we need to join it up. And all of those things are going to involve farmers. Farmers are the only people that can deliver that at any scale. So let's see what the government are saying about their own ambition. And these are quotes that have come directly from Secretaries of State. It's the government's ambition to leave the environment in a better condition than we found it. We will replace BPS with a system of public money for public goods. And this theme of public money for public goods is something you'll see more and more of. I believe the most important public good we should pay for is environmental enhancement. So you can see the direction of travel here on everything. This is all about paying farmers to do good things for the public and for the environment. And as for the environmental land management scheme itself, it is the cornerstone of the government's new agricultural policy, founded on the principle of public money for public goods to achieve the goals of the 25-year plan, net zero by 2050, and support the rural economy. So there you pretty much have everything that the government wants to do is going to be wrapped up in this new environmental land management scheme. So let's have a look at what they're saying farmers and land managers may be paid for. Clean air, clean and plentiful water. I don't know about you, but we've had plenty of plentiful water over the last 12 months, perhaps a bit too much of that. Thriving plants and wildlife. So there's your biodiversity element. Protection from environmental hazards. That would include flooding. Beauty, heritage and engagement with the environment. This is our social outreach. This is where we reach the general public. This is where money comes from that sector. And finally, reduction of greenhouse gases and adaptation to climate change. This will involve everything from tree planting to soil management. We might even be looking at things like beetle banks and hedgerows as a means of sequestering carbon. So you can see we have a scheme emerging here, which has a plethora of opportunities. So put simply, what do we want to achieve out of this? Well, first and foremost, it must be open to all. And this was something Sir Don Curry made abundantly clear in his report, that broad and shallow, open to all, great participation is absolutely essential. If we're going to achieve landscape scale delivery of biodiversity or environmental benefits, we need a landscape scale participation. The scheme will be three-tiered, and I'll go into how those tiers look in a minute. And there's a need for us to balance different things. And I picked two out here, balancing carbon and biodiversity. You know, you'll have seen that during the general election, each political party was competing with each other as to how many trees each one was going to plant. And during that discussion, nobody mentioned anything about biodiversity. And so there becomes a danger that we eclipse one thing with the other, when in fact what we're trying to achieve here is both. And actually we can achieve both if we do it intelligently. So let's look at what that three-tiered scheme looks like. Tier 1 is your foundation scheme. It's open to all. It's full of options. What I think is most exciting about this tier is it delivers for both productivity and the environment. And I think it's absolutely critical that in this development of this new scheme, we do not lose sight of the importance of productivity. We have to remain competitive. We need to feed an increasing population across the world. So sacrificing productivity for the environment is not an option. We need to be able to do the two of those things together. And I would recommend the Sustainable Food and Farming Scheme report, which is a report put together by the NFU and ourselves and LEAF and some other players in the field, which sets out how that productivity and environmental benefit can be harnessed. If we move then into tier 2, this is perhaps more complex, perhaps not to myself and Phil, where we run a farm which is stuffed full of options for wildlife, but this is your wildlife seed mixes and your pollen and nectars and things that are more bespoke. And also this is where collaboration takes place, and I'll talk a bit about that shortly. And then finally, tier 3, this is your larger scale projects, landscape scale repurposing of land. And I personally think we need to keep a very close eye on what the government does with this. Tiers 1 and 2 are very clearly bottom up, driven by farmers, driven by farming communities about what they want to do and what they want to achieve. Tier 3 looks very much top down to me. The sort of things I think you might see in tier 3 are perhaps rewilding, for instance, or the creation of a catchment scale sized forest. This is where farming might possibly disappear entirely from outside of this tier. And since we're talking about to the East of England Agricultural Society of England, what might that mean for some of our most productive lands? Well, here we are in the fens. And of course, one of the things we know about fenland soils is that they are shrinking. And they've been shrinking for a very, very long time, as this picture shows. And they're shrinking because they are losing carbon dioxide through the oxidation of the organic matter or the peat in those soils. A hectare of fenland soil can lose up to 35 tons of carbon a year through oxidation. So if you look there at the 1 million tons of carbon dioxide a year coming from different soils or enterprises in the UK, you can see that upland blanket bog, forestry and grassland are contributing varying amounts, but the vast majority of this emission is coming from lowland agriculture and horticulture. And the way to stop that is to re-wet the fen, and then that stops that oxidation taking place. So that might be the sort of grand scale thing that we might see government engaging in. So I just think we need to be very cautious about that particular tier. I want to move on now to the principles behind the new scheme, and here I feel very optimistic. I think we've really come a long way from the worst parts of the environmental stewardship scheme in the attitude in which government are now approaching this. So they're saying they want to work constructively with scheme members. This is a collaboration, not us inspecting what you are doing. We want it to be simple, a clear application process, minimal essential information required. And this is something I'm very keen on simplicity. There seems to be a problem for civil servants. They seem to be hardwired to complexity, and we keep on having to remind them that simplicity is key to this scheme. We want the scheme to inspire people to engage with it and to take part in it and to collaborate within it to deliver these landscape scale public benefits. And we want to place the scheme member in control of what and how they deliver. And this is back to this bottom-up approach of us deciding what we want to do within the scheme. Running along parallel to the development of the environmental land management scheme, Defra are also keen to test new ways of working. And this includes how do we design a good land management plan? What does this look like? So there are a number of people testing and trialing out what that might look like. What's the best way to give advice and guidance? What's most effective? What do people want? So there's another section of people that are looking at that. More people are looking at how we make payments. People are looking at how we decide where we put what where. People are looking at how best to collaborate with each other and other ways that we can deliver these public goods and public benefits. So I just move now on to the timeline that we're looking at, so you all know the scales in which this is happening, and this has been well publicized, so I'll whip through this. But 2020 to 2027, we see the BPS phase out. If you're in stewardship now, or you want to go into a mid-tier scheme, you can still do that. The schemes are open, and those will take you through to 2025. Those of you who are in an existing scheme but don't want to go into a new one, you can look at an extension. How many years you can extend that by is not clear, but if we go from 1 year to the next, that gives you an indication. From 2021 to 2023, there will be some ELMS schemes piloted. So people will volunteer to try out some parts of the new environmental land management scheme, and that will then be appraised and by the assessors. And then from 2021 to 2024, the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme will come in. Now, this will come in because the BPS phase out is out of sync with the ELMS roll in. So there's going to be a funding gap during that period. And so it's government have recognised that it's really important that farmers continue to receive funding. So they have made available this scheme, which will have in it some elements of what will eventually end up in ELMS Tier 1. I now move on to monitoring and enforcement. And again, the whole mantra here is that it should be more supportive than punitive. And some of the work or the monitoring that's done should be done ongoing by the farmer. So instead of the RPA inspector turning up as happened in the past, much of the measurements will be done by the farmer, or can be done by the farmer. So a very good example here, here's a pollen and nectar mix. You might put a quadrat over this and just record the number of bees which are visiting that quadrat in the space of a minute. And then that would give an indication of how effective that had been. And again, as I say, rather than having an RPA inspector, this is something that you could do for yourselves. And the GWCT is conducting a test and trial at the moment, which is looking at the various things that farmers can easily record for themselves and just see how useful that is. So in terms of the monitoring of enforcement, more supportive, more ongoing monitoring, earned recognition. Those people who are already in quality assurance schemes or leaf mark, they are less likely to be inspected under this new regime. The new regime consists of site visits. Defra are very carefully not using the words inspection here, but site visits and desk checks of the paperwork. We're told that the evidence required will be proportionate and sensible. Later on, technology will be used increasingly to monitor, and enforcement will really only be focused on serious breaches and fraud, which in my view is the way that it really should be. The site visitors that will come, we are asking, these people, please, can they have the right skills to be coming and talking to us? Because I think many of us felt in the past the RPA did not have the right skills to do that. And to get away from some text and give you a picture for a few moments, here's a lovely pond which we measured and were claiming on. As you can see, it's full of water, but when the inspector came, it was in the middle of a drought, so the pond was half empty, and so we were fined for breaching, overclaiming the size of the pond. This is an example where we really do need to have common sense, and this is the sort of thing we really do want to move away from. So let's now look at the outline payments. At the moment, we exist on income forgone and costs incurred, but going forward, we can expect a reward element. I think this is critical. This gives us the opportunity to be able to do budgets based on environmental payments as well as our agricultural productivity. So I really welcome this. In the past, the CAP did not allow a profit element to be built into this, but Defra are saying this is a key part of where they want to go. Higher payments for working together with other farmers, and payments by results for certain elements, things that are easy to measure or assess. There's a great deal of difference between a fantastic wild bird cover and one which delivers nothing, and those that deliver a fantastic outcome should be rewarded for that. So some of you may have come across the concept of farmer clusters, which first came about in 2012. We now have over 130 farmer clusters established across the country, and Defra recognise that this is an excellent way of farmers working together to deliver those public goods, and they will pay extra for that. So let's hope we see many more develop coming out of this. And as you can see, this chap's extremely pleased with himself in his payment by results. Actually, looking at those mixes in the background there, he probably deserves to be a millionaire for delivering that. Fantastic effort. What are the things might we expect? Well, public money for healthy soils. Well, this has proved quite tricky because how we define a healthy soil is quite difficult. And it's difficult because even the academics and the experts can't actually agree on what a healthy soil is. But certainly if we were building carbon into that soil, that would be something that would be of public benefit, sequestering carbon. Growing cover crops is not only good for taking up nitrates, which is good for farmers, but it's also fixing carbon at the same time and helping to reduce soil erosion. So those are another thing that could be good. There's no doubt there's a shortage of options for grassland farmers, and that's something we need to look at. We need to make and enable the dairy sector to be able to engage in ELMS by providing options there. And there's no doubt that the inclusion of grass into all arable rotations is extremely good for soil health. And, you know, if we turn the clock back a few hundred years, the Norfolk four-course rotation worked quite simply because half the time the soil was being restored, adding fertility and carbon back to that soil, and half the time it was being exploited, producing cash crops. If we can get that balance and get that paid for through ELMS, I see that to be extremely helpful in all arable systems. There's some data here from Rothamsted which shows the value of grassland in the system. If you look at the blue line with the solid circles, that's a grass field kept in grass, and that is the carbon level in tons per hectare. And you can see that it goes up from about 65 to 70 tons per hectare over a period of about 60 years. But it's at quite a high level. And if you look at the blue line with the open circles, that's that other half of that same field that's ploughed out and put into arable cropping. And you can see there the relentless decline in soil carbon over that 60-year period. Conversely, the red line shows an arable field, and the solid dots are an arable field which has been converted to grass. And you see the amount of soil carbon go from 40 to over 60 tons per hectare. And the open circles are the arable part of the field that was kept arable, where you see the situation is stabilized around 40. And so this is the benefit of encouraging mixed rotations. Other options that will be open to us is our ability to plant trees on farmland without it being de-designated as agricultural land and turned into woodland. So, for instance, planting alleyways of trees between crops. And I would suggest here, if we put a grass strip underneath those trees, then there's a carbon payment also for that grass as well as for the trees. And of course, we can do that in livestock systems as well. And a very simple way of putting more trees onto farms rather than taking land out of production to plant trees is to simply increase the number of trees that we put in our hedgerows. Now, I fully accept that many parts of the east of England area don't have those hedgerows, but I'm just suggesting it in an area like this. We have 700,000 hedgerows around the countryside. If we planted a tree every 20 meters, we could host over 40 million trees without taking a single acre out of production. So these are just some of the ideas that we should be thinking of or looking at within the new scheme and hopefully getting payments for. So I'll finish up with some conclusions, and I think perhaps also very importantly, the lessons that we, and hopefully what we've learned, we're passing on to Defra, that Defra have learned about the previous environmental schemes and why we should be able to make the new scheme so much better. First of all, we need to recognise that farmers need to produce food and wildlife or environmental benefits and be properly rewarded for both. We do point out to Defra that 3.2 billion may not be enough for all we want, and we point to Norway, Iceland and Switzerland, who are all European countries but outside the EU, and all of those have chosen to pay more than we paid under the CAP for those additional environmental benefits. So we shouldn't set ceilings on this, rather we should raise our aspirations. Any environmental land management scheme needs to be farmer driven and simple apply to. And I think, you know, many people were put off from the old scheme because of the restrictions and the red tape that came along with them. Farmer clusters deliver more and therefore should be rewarded more. If you can deliver across a wider landscape, that's a greater public benefit. The advice and guidance that farmers take is at the farmer's discretion, but always worth remembering that if you produce greater public goods, you should get greater payments and therefore greater rewards. And application windows should not be a single date in each year, but should be when it suits you to go into the scheme with your business. And yes, please, regular payments made on time would be extremely helpful so that we can manage our cash flows. A gold-plated scheme is a worthless one. There are some people that would design the most amazing scheme that would simply not attract farmers into it. A gold-plated scheme with no one in it is worthless. Any scheme needs to include a reward element, so we need to make sure that we can make a margin on what we're delivering for the environment, and we need to keep farmers on the land too. If no farmers on the land equals no conservation. And finally, you know, light touch verification, earned recognition, and please, presumption of innocent. We're not all trying to rip the scheme off. In fact, most people are really trying to do their best. And in fact, if you are rewarding them to do that, then they most surely will. Thank you very much.